Thank you all for joining us for this webinar this afternoon. Appreciate everyone who's taking the time to spend listening, engaging with us, participating in this webinar. My name is David Fournier. I'm the Vice President of Client Care here at Adventist Risk Management. Joining me today is Daisy Montes de Oca, Manager of Client Care. And really the person who has spearheaded and did the research and did a lot of the work to develop this material that we're looking at today. So thank you, Daisy, for joining us.
Thank you, Dave.
We're going to get started in just a moment. A couple items of business here is, I think Elizabeth has shared in the chat. Elizabeth is another colleague of ours, and she's helping us from behind the scenes. And she's going to help us with the managing the questions. And so I just encourage you, if you have questions, please, by all means, share those in the Q&A feature on the in the system here. And we will get to as many of those as we possibly can. If we're unable to get to your question, Elizabeth's going to track that and help us follow up with you to make sure that your questions are answered. We do want to be timely in this webinar. We're hoping that this will be a robust, but not a long one. The last one I did was quite a long webinar. So normally we shoot for these to be right around 20 minutes of actual content, and keeps it fairly short and sweet and really on point. And that's the goal, is to be very focused on what we're talking about. So again, just thank you everyone for joining us for this, and we're going to get started. Today we're talking about bullying, and I find this to be a particularly important topic, and I really appreciate Daisy leading us through the material and talking about bullying. It's certainly become a topic that is high on everyone's radar. It's in the news. Why is Adventist Risk Management talking about this? I think is a question I would be wondering. But it's really important to Adventist Risk Management. It's important for a number of reasons, but not the least of which is we provide the church with insurance solutions. We recommend prevention and loss control measures, risk management advice. And one of the areas that we provide for the large majority of the churches here, certainly in North America, is employment practices and sexual misconduct coverage. So when there are sex abuse cases, those cases come to Adventist Risk Management, and we work on those. And so it's very much in our interest, and from a moral, and it is also our business to work towards prevention of those kinds of incidents from taking place. And I think there is, and I think we'll see that in our presentation, a direct connection between this topic of bullying and abuse. Anyway, we'll explore that as we go through. So as we get started here, Daisy, if you'll walk us through kind of the beginning, it takes a village. What is our role? And how do we as leaders relate to bullying in our various leadership roles?
Right. Thank you, David. So I actually taught in the classroom for about 7 years prior to working with Adventist Risk Management. And one of the things that I remember most is having a lot of support from my colleagues. It took a team of us to not only educate each child, whether it was some type of intervention, prevention program, whether it was a material, et cetera, there was always a group of us. We held each other accountable, and we walked the classroom or the kids through this educational process, this learning process. And as I think about bullying and behavior that may be bad behavior that may be happening in the classroom, I still believe that it takes the support of the school, the leadership, the principal, the vice principal, or any team members of that school to help identify what's causing or what is the root of these behaviors. Is it bullying? Is it other type of behavior? And what are we doing to not only educate the child, like that's our job, that's the job that each teacher has, but also what are we doing to shape those behaviors into positive
Right.
behaviors and outcomes? So it just takes a village to educate, the kids that come through our doors day after day, year after year.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Um, Having worked more, I've never been a teacher, but I really appreciate your perspective coming from that background in education. My experience has been more, as a father,
Mm-hmm.
and as I was a leader in the area of, I'm going to blank on the terminology, but it was the early Sabbath school classes at my local church, right? So working with those little ones in a
Mm-hmm.
Sabbath school setting, you saw a wide range of behaviors and opportunities to shape it. And your comment here about doing it as a team is necessary.
Right.
I certainly, if I was leading out from the front that day, I needed those. It was primaries, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
My mind works a few minutes, seconds late there. But in primaries, I might have been leading out from the front. I needed a team of people in the room as well
Right.
who are also watching, responding,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
we needed good behaviors in the children as well.
Right.
And you don't always get that in all of them, but um, educating them about what the expectations were was really important.
Oh, that's super important for each child to understand what those expectations are.
All right. I do want to add one more note. I think the concepts on the screen right now are largely familiar with to our audience, but I do always want to emphasize the last point
Mm.
in an extra special way. The way our church is organized and the structure, the local church, whether it's a Pathfinder club, a Sabbath school department, or if it's one of our precious schools in a classroom, it's important for all of the leadership, whether it's a teacher, Pathfinder leader, whomever, to understand that we are part of something larger than ourselves. And that's not just a philosophical concept. You could go to the extreme, right? We are as a Christian organization representing God,
Mm-hmm.
Jesus, the gospel, the kingdom of heaven. That's sort of the biggest picture view. But we're also representing a fairly large organization.
Right.
We're not just our club,
Mm-hmm.
and the impact of our actions are not just localized to that club.
Mm-hmm.
It's also, we are part of a conference of churches and schools, right? So it's a fairly large organization, and unlike some other organizations in that we may think of as similar, let's pick on, let's say, the Baptists, right? Their denomination, and they have churches. They do some of the same kinds of things we do, but if they get into something terrible happens at their organization, um, you know hopefully insurance is able to respond to that. Maybe there's an accident, maybe there's a case of abuse, and the insurance does what it can to the limits that they have purchased, and then what,
Mm-hmm.
right? Let's say that the award is quite a bit more than what the insurance limits were able to produce. Well, then the assets of the organization are at stake. Well, in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, our assets start at the conference level.
Mm-hmm.
And what's being sued is a very large organization with adequate insurance limits and incredibly massive assets. So important for us to all be on the same page on this,
Mm-hmm.
to follow the guidelines and the guidance that we have from our conference, and to really just take that responsibility as a positive, as a serious thing, to protect our kids.
Yeah.
I think that helps frame our conversation about bullying just a little bit. So talk to me. What is bullying? We've been using the term a bunch already. Let's get some basic level set, some definitions here. What are we actually talking about?
Okay. So bullying, there's three components to bullying. It's really a behavior that's unwanted. It's a behavior that is perceived as an imbalance of power between kids or, young adults, whatever that may be. And of course, it can be repeated over time. So it can start off as something like not bullying. It can just be teasing, for example. So there's a difference between teasing and bullying.
So you're saying not every unpleasant moment of my life that involves another person can I characterize as bullying?
Correct. Right.
Okay.
Right. It's not. But however, that teasing can develop into something aggressive throughout the school year or throughout their elementary years, junior high years. If it's something that we don't identify and we don't start fixing or trying to support that student in producing positive behavior.
Okay.
So it can kind of start as teasing, and it can stay at just teasing, and that's something that a teacher can address quickly just by re-emphasizing the rules of the classroom and of the school.
Right.
However, if it continues and it becomes aggressive and it becomes harmful to the victim, then it's going to be bullying.
Right. So it's kind of really dependent on this idea of repeating over time.
Right.
Right. Not that we want to excuse like an incident.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I would imagine we're looking for incidents to respond to in order to prevent this becoming a repeated behavior.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But bullying by definition is something that is taking place over time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's helpful. Talk to me about the different types of bullying. I'm noticing some trends here. I'll ask you some questions. Walk us through what are the various types of bullying.
So the various types of bullying are verbal, physical, relational, and of course now, and we see more and more often, is cyberbullying, whether it's through each child's media platform on their cell phone, tablet, Facebook, things like that. There's more cyberbullying, and I think that might be something that we can. It brings a lot more.
It's a new challenge.
Yeah, it's a challenge because it's happening in devices the teachers may not be aware of, the parents may not be aware of, but the attitude the teachers are going to be able to notice in the classroom.
So we may see the effects.
Yes.
Sooner than we'll see the activity, the behavior itself that caused the effect. Okay. Well, I can't help but stop here a little bit, because I look at this list, and to me, this is where I draw a direct line. And why I believe this is such an important discussion is there's a direct line between the ideas here in broad terms of and actual abuse. It's as though we're really just looking at a spectrum, and bullying is just slightly less severe than abuse, and may actually turn into abuse. I would imagine, because you're looking at some of the same categories, and we're having the same conversation in the abuse arena. Cyberbullying, it's interesting that you bring that one up, because we're having that same conversation about abuse. Cyber abuse is taking place. And we're talking about sexual abuse, we're talking about psychological abuse, we're talking about violence, which turns into the pushing on the playground seems inappropriate and a problem at a young age, but it turns into things like dating violence later on. It turns into intimate partner violence in marriages, and these are things that all of a sudden we have to solve in sort of the aftermath of a terrible incidents or life. And they started at early ages.
Right. They started in that playground. They started in the halls, in the school buses, at camp. And that's why it's so important that in our schools at such a young age, we start identifying and start, implementing rules and establishing protocols on how to deal with this type of behavior, because the last thing we want as teachers and as parents is that as they grow older and go to college, they get into dating violence, and abuse sexual abuse situations.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if we don't work on the behaviors at a young age,
Right.
as people have more freedom and privacy as they grow older, um, it can escalate, I guess. Why? What about humans causes this to be something that happens, that we explore, that we're up against this challenge in the first place, and try to narrow in a little further than just the existence of sin in the world.
Right. That's what I was going to say. We're just plain humans, and it's just we can be mean and cruel at times, but kids do it. It's a learned behavior, Dave. It's something that either they've witnessed at home, they see it on TV, they see it on YouTube channels. It's something that they've learned. It's not a behavior that we're born with.
Right.
It's something that we learn, and kids can bully just for any reason. They can tease just like they tease for any reason.
Right.
It can be because you look different, you wear glasses, you're overweight, you're not one of the smartest ones, or it can be an array of reasons that kids bully.
Right. So I noticed something. I'm a father, and my daughter will be just super excited that I'm referencing her here today. But I think this is a pretty universal concept. As she was, little and growing older, she tested me constantly, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as a little one, oh, that's where the boundary is. That's where Dad will draw the line, so to speak, and he's not going to permit me to go further. And I will think I have solved something in her behaviors, and I will have for a minute, or a week, or a month, or a year. And then it comes time, as she is developed, as she's looking for more freedom, for her to test the limit again. And in my case, it's been a fairly pleasant and good experience, and we've been able to navigate that. But it was interesting to be able to see problems I thought I solved continue to not become problems, but be tested. Oh, is Dad still paying attention? And I wonder if that's also what happens with little ones, is they observe, like you were saying, either observing another child who says, oh, okay, well, that little guy pushed the other kid over and took his truck. I want a truck. I'll go do the same thing. And it worked. And now I have a truck. So how bad is this?
So what you're saying is that each student in the classroom is also watching how the teacher manages this behavior.
Okay.
So if I see that the student is getting away with something, the teacher may just say, you need to please stop, or it doesn't address the root of that behavior. There may be other students that will copy that, because kids copy each other.
Right.
They do some of the same things. Oh, that worked for them. Oh, I learned that behavior, so I'm going to go do it now.
Right. And that's normal here.
Right.
That's how our group, our community, whether it's a classroom or a club or church or whatever it is, that's now the norm of what's okay here. And usually then someone will probably test that limit to, okay, if that's the new norm, which I would argue many of the teachers probably wouldn't have thought that was the norm, right? They just had missed something. Well, they're gonna push to see if the new norm is actually further than that. All right. Bullying. Students who bully.
Like I said, can be any size. They can be any age. It can be any grade, any gender. Anyone can be a bully.
Okay. So we're not looking for a certain demographic to talk about here today. No. It really can be anywhere.
Yes.
Not my daughter, obviously.
Yeah. No.
Well, it could be, though, I guess is the joke I'm making there poorly. Let's talk about, who is the victim and why?
Oh, yeah. So the victim is just like anyone can be a bully, Dave. anyone can be a victim as well.
Okay.
Okay, it's someone that doesn't possess the same trends, or they don't have the latest gadgets, technology. They look different. They have an accent when they speak. It can just be anyone that is perceived as different.
It's not even weaker or less than. It's just different. It could actually be better
Right.
in some way.
Mhm.
It's a difference. Okay. So something I guess we can look for is to say, okay, this kid doesn't necessarily fit the norm, and so kids are going to be looking at this to test and see if we can pick on this. We're special. All right, where can it take place?
Dave, teachers, we have the most control in the classroom. We're able to control because we have rules established. Kids are at their desks. They know what the process is and what's expected of them in the classroom. However, where we have less control is at recess, in between periods, or in the hallway, during the cafeteria, in the school bus. If we don't have adequate supervision, roaming adults, behavior can happen really anywhere.
Right.
And while we may have these roaming adults, it's going to be difficult to really identify and find all those events or those bullying situations. However, if we do have supervision, adequate supervision, at least we have a better control of what's happening outside of the classroom.
Right. So I did an analysis of the abuse cases, which I think, the parallels work both ways here. And I did an analysis of the abuse cases that we have on our files based on just the child-to-child cases, looking for trends, and I found very similar things. Again, found there's no demographic that is excluded from these terrible incidents. So another trend I discovered, or fact pattern that I discovered, is what you also identified here, and that is that many of the incidents that resulted in claims took place in what I would consider transitional moments.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So you talk about the field trip. Well, it's on the bus. If there's not adequate supervision, are you taking Pathfinders on an overnight trip? Who's supervising to make sure that something, relationally isn't taking place there that shouldn't be? Sending kids to the bathroom. A lot of incidents taking place in bathrooms. Very difficult to supervise a bathroom effectively. If certainly not the same way you supervise a classroom, right? So these transitional moments become opportunities for abuse, and in this case, for bullying to take place, right? And I would suspect there's much more bullying taking place than actual abuse. The reason I bring that up, I think there's a solution built into understanding the problem. Us just knowing that it's in those transitional moments that we're our weakest allows us to be extra vigilant and look for solutions and extra help in those transitional moments, that we have to be extra on our guard.
Yes.
All right, talk to me. We've talked about the idea of bullying at different ages.
Right, it's going to look different in elementary school, and in middle school and in high school. This behavior is going to progress. I suspect that now in junior high, there may be more of that cyber, because kids are now having, at a younger age, they have cell phones. But bullying does take place in all levels, at all grade levels, throughout the child's education. There's one important piece to this bullying, and it's that bystander. We talked about the bully and the bullied. There's always that third person that witnesses. It could be a friend, it can be a teacher, it can be not even a friend, just another student that that goes to that school. That bystander is so critical, Dave, extremely critical, because they can have a positive impact on the situation at that moment. They can intervene if it's safe enough to intervene.
Right.
And by that positive gesture, things can change dramatically for the victim.
Right.
The victim's going to feel safe and protected by either a friend or someone else that's intervened. It's critical. It's very important to empower all the students, and to help them understand that this is not okay and that they can actually do something about it if they witness it. They can intervene or they can go tell an adult.
Get some help.
And get some help.
Yeah. So it's really the best chance for some advocacy for the person who's being a victim in this scenario. I would argue also, just at another level, that this is the best chance for the person engaged in the bullying behavior for help, because ultimately this is not helpful to their lives in the long run either. And the earlier that they get corrected behaviors, the better for them. Okay. So let's talk about bullying prevention. I mean, if we don't talk about solutions, then all we've done here is gathered and wrung our hands and said, oh, isn't bullying terrible? Let's talk about bullying prevention.
So why does this matter? It matters, Dave. It matters that teachers understand the importance of communicating to the students that this is not a zone for bullying, that this is not something that they will tolerate.
Right.
Okay. And so how do we do that? One, we have to communicate this. The entire school has to be on board. We're an anti-bullying school, so it's not tolerated, and build a safe environment.
Right.
Build and implement anti-bullying policy and implement a positive behavior environment.
Right. So what I hear you saying is we can't just say, well, we're a Christian school, a Christian teacher, Christian kids probably. So the assumption is, you're saying it takes a proactive, set the expectations, make it very clear, and kind of define it as a thing,
right? So
that the line doesn't get crossed in the first place.
Right. So we need to establish a culture of inclusion. The students and kids, they need to learn how to respect each other, their differences, right, and how they bring value because of those differences into their classrooms.
Right.
So we have to build that.
Doesn't happen by accident.
No.
As seems to be the case with all human behaviors, does not happen by accident. So let's talk about creating an actionable plan. You've mentioned some of these concepts already. Mm-hmm. Just having that definition out there of this is a thing, this is what bullying is, means a lot, so that people are clear in their mind what is to be prevented. Mm-hmm. What is the stance? What is your position as a leader, as a school, as an organization? This is how we're going to relate to this. It seems like that becomes super important, not just for the student and the teacher or the Pathfinder person, kid, or kid in the Sabbath school. I think it also then becomes super important for the parents to understand, here's what the school has said is important and how we're going to behave here. Here are the consequences that are going to happen.
Right.
And you can expect that this will happen. Mm-hmm. Because it seems as though today, certainly, parents will often they just advocate for their child regardless of the child's behaviors and the consequences the child should expect to be receiving. So it's important to communicate that out ahead of time.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
So talk to us about some ideas of what are ways that we can respond before we get all the way to, the very, worst case response of maybe this kid can't come to our school anymore or engage with our church. What do we do with that?
So we have a cycle of prevention.
Okay. Walk us through the cycle.
So the first part would be to identify the behavior, the bully, okay? Once we identify it, we have to stop it immediately. and really try to find out from each person that's involved separately. We
Right.
separate the two and find out from each person what's really going on.
Okay.
Is it really bullying, or are we just teasing? What's the situation at hand? Okay. If it's bullying, then it's something that we have to stop immediately. We have to mediate.
Okay.
And like you mentioned the parents, we have to alert the parents.
Right.
Once we've clearly, this happens and we've clearly communicated in the student handbook or in the school's website policy, this is our stance on bullying. If this behavior happens, these are the steps that our school will take.
Right.
One of them being to alert the parents so that they can be involved in that prevention, in that situation.
Right.
So we would alert the parent and educate both the parent and the student.
And both parties.
Both parties. Why is this not okay?
Right.
What about the behavior is incorrect, and what can we do about it?
Okay. Well, I can see, again, I'm going to keep making parallels to, the abuse conversation. And there's a case that actually really springs to mind from that study I did of our case files. And it had a case of bullying. And it started as bullying. And so there was a young lady who was bullying a slightly younger boy. They were close in age, but I guess she was a year older or two. And so she was bullying him in an ongoing way. And at some point he became very frustrated and he was done with that. And so he responded in what turned into a case. He, struck out at her, touched her very inappropriately. And so then a claim is filed by her family against the church due to his actions. So in this case, neither child is in the right. I don't excuse either one of them. But I do wonder if the best solution would have happened really early on.
Right.
If that school had a clear understanding of bullying, if those kids had the expectations had been set and there had been leadership present and paying attention to see this escalating and have it solved before either of these kids were in a position of that kind of frustration, or certainly the girl who was hurt and I would say injured, at least emotionally, due to how she was treated, by the frustrated young man. And so I just really feel like this cycle of abuse, it's very helpful because we could have stopped what turned into an abusive situation way back before it even really turned into a serious bullying situation. Again, direct line.
Right. And you know what, Dave, I'm going to mention something else, because in this prevention cycle, we only focus on the bully and how do we support, how we educate the bully, how do we intervene in this behavior.
Right.
But we don't focus on the actual victim. Both need to feel supported by the staff. Right.
Okay.
So the victim, what emotional,
so what are they going through?
What are they going through? What stresses them? What's going on with that individual, with that student, and how do we support the victim as well in our schools?
Right. So if they've been sort of marginalized, which is maybe why they were being bullied in the first place, how do we help them feel that no, we did not approve of what happened, what was happening there. It's not okay. We're solving that over here. And how do we more fully include you into the group so that you're not sort of on that outside, well, who's the next kid who's going to start picking on that young person?
It can be really complex, and the teachers already have a lot to do. And this is just adding a little bit more to the plate, but it's very important because it affects the students' learning. Their productivity, so it's very, very, very important.
Well, let's talk a little bit about where we can learn more. Solutions. This is October 25 today,
Mhm.
and you told me that this is actually October is Bullying Prevention
That's
Month.
correct. Yes. So there's plenty of resources, plenty of activities that each teacher can have in their classrooms to kind of bring awareness, at least start educating the students. They can find a lot of information at the stopbullying.gov website.
Okay.
Very helpful information there for teachers and students as well, parents. And of course, Dave, we have our own resources at adventistrisk.org that are free. They can download them and use the tools at their schools and in their classrooms.
Great. And I've heard of, you mentioned to me earlier, another organization that many of our church schools are
Right.
using, and I do apologize if I butcher how this is pronounced, but the OWIAS system. I think many will be familiar with that, which I believe is a very education-centric resource, but a prominent one that I know many of our school systems are using. A lot of good information. Thank you.
Yes.
I very much appreciate your work in this area. And you may notice, those paying attention on the chat, that Elizabeth is also sharing out direct links to
Oh, that's
information,
great.
which is helpful. And this webinar is also being recorded. So this will be put up on our YouTube channel. It'll be a resource, and I think Elizabeth can probably add in some of the resource links into the description on our YouTube channel as well. I like to end with a little bit of a call to action.
Okay.
It's fun to get around and talk about problems and solutions and stuff, but I think the key is, are we going to go do something? And it sometimes feels like basic general behaviors are not something we can move the needle on. But I think you've helped us see some practical resources, a place to get started, and that we absolutely can make a difference.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for taking the time to make this issue a priority in whatever ministry that you're involved in. Thank you so much for your ministry. Thank you for leading in that area. You're a partner out there. You care about our kids. And we very, very much appreciate that here at Adventist Risk Management. So thank you, and until next time.